from the Constitution Unit. Should prisoners be given the right to vote? Next week, a new attempt to make that happen will come before the House of Lords. 6 years ago today, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that a blanket ban on prisoners voting in elections was unlawful. The government's view was that prisoners had broken the social contract and so forfeited their right to vote. Since the ruling, ministers have embarked on a series of consultations. The original case was brought by John Hirst, who was serving a life sentence for manslaughter. He told me he couldn't see why the government hadn't resolved the issue so long after his legal victory.
Yesterday, you've got the Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, talking about rushing through legislation on this methadone before the election. Now, that issue has only just come up in the last few days, and he's wanting to rush into Parliament and get the thing through quickly. Here we've got a case that's been waiting to be dealt with through Parliament for 6 years, and the government isn't moving on it.
But if it were to become an election issue, wouldn't that damage your cause? Because I imagine public opinion is very firmly against the view that prisoners should be given the right to vote.
No, this is the thing. I mean, that is the government's line. They've actually conducted 2 consultation exercises, and the majority of people actually voted for all prisoners to have the vote. There was only 4 people actually supported the government's view to deny prisoners the franchise.
But don't you think there would be public outrage at the idea of convicted murderers, convicted rapists being given the right to vote?
No, because it actually helps. You know, if people get the vote, then it means that they're coming out and they're having more of a say in society, and it helps towards rehabilitation. What you've got at the moment is you've got a position where prisoners are looking at Jack Straw, who's breaking the law on this issue, and refusing to change it. And all you're getting there is an example, it's okay to break the law. Well, it isn't okay to break the law.
Isn't it a bit strong to say that the Justice Secretary is breaking the law over this? I mean, the government are consulting over what to do about the European Court of Human Rights judgment.
If he continues down this line, then to hold the next general election and denying 73,000 people a vote, it legally invalidates the election.
John Hirst. The issue has been revived by way of an amendment to the Constitutional Reform Bill currently in the Lords, laid down by the former Chief Inspector of Prisons, Lord Ramsbotham. The Lib Dem peer, Lord Lester, backs the move, and a short time ago he explained why.
It's very important because the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, who supervise the execution of the judgments, have repeatedly called on the United Kingdom to give effect to the judgment, which is binding upon us in international law. And therefore, quite apart from the fact that prisoners ought to be given voting rights, because it's very important indeed that unless they are guilty of heinous crimes, they should be able to participate in the electoral process like everybody else. Quite apart from that, there is an even bigger issue, which is why the government are flouting a judgment binding upon us from the Apex Court on Human Rights in Europe. And as I say, that sets an extremely bad example to authoritarian states in the rest of Europe who can say, oh, well, if the UK doesn't obey, then nor do we have to.
Lord Lester, well, Dominic Grieve is the Shadow Justice Secretary and joins me now from Westminster. If you're elected, if you become part of the next government, aren't you going to have to implement what Lord Lester was describing as a binding judgment?
Well, the judgment is certainly binding, and the government has failed to act on it. But my interpretation of the judgment is that the court is saying that the current blanket prohibition, which has existed for well over 100 years and has never been debated publicly, cannot be justified. So the proper course of action is to have a debate in Parliament on the matter with a free vote at the end, and to see what members of Parliament say about whether convicted prisoners should have the vote.
But if they vote in favour of a blanket ban, would that make any difference, given that the judgment is binding?
Oh, I think it would make a difference. I think that if Parliament were on a free vote to, having debated the matter thoroughly, to conclude that the the prohibition should continue because those who have committed offences sufficiently serious to be imprisoned merit the deprivation of civil rights that goes with it. I think the European Court of Human Rights would be in great difficulty about challenging that decision, which would be based upon a perfectly rational debate and premise. The difficulty the government has at the moment is that there has been no such debate, and I am critical of them for not having initiated it. Indeed, I've suggested on a number of occasions to Jack Straw that we should have precisely such a debate as a way of resolving the matter.
What would be so wrong with giving prisoners the right to vote? I mean, it happens in most other EU countries, doesn't it? The only other countries that automatically disenfranchise prisoners are Bulgaria, Estonia, Hungary and Romania.
Well, I think you've just highlighted the fact that there are, in fact, different views on this around Western Europe. I don't think that we are in breach of human rights in having such a prohibition, provided it is rationally based. And the rational basis is that somebody who has committed a crime which is sufficiently serious to be imprisoned, during the period of their imprisonment, they can't vote. I don't see anything irrational about that at all.
John Hirst's view is that if you give them the right to vote, it helps with rehabilitation because they're becoming active participants in democracy and society.
I can understand that argument, and indeed I'm very much in favour of rehabilitating offenders. But I have to say that in the great scheme of things, I think there are a number of higher priorities and more important things in terms of bringing about offender rehabilitation than giving them the right to vote. I suspect in reality, in many cases, it wouldn't be exercised for many. And as I say, I think it is a legitimate deprivation of rights by society to mark the gravity of offences which lead to imprisonment. And as I think, as you yourself hinted at the beginning, my feeling is that public opinion is rather strongly against such a move. And I think that's something which politicians have to take into account as well.
Dominic Grieve, many thanks. And that